So today we're going to look at asexual, or the different types of asexual reproduction. Now, everything we've been doing so far is focusing on asexual. So asexual doesn't necessarily mean no intercourse. It just means you're not mixing DNA from two individuals. I want to make sure that that's clear, that sexual reproduction does not have to involve intercourse. It just means that you have two parents combining genetic information to make an offspring, whereas asexual reproduction, you're not using information from two individuals. So here's our little gizmo from the movie Gremlins. It's way older than you guys will ever know. But if you get Gizmo wet, he just automatically creates more gizmos, and you get more gremlins. So he's cloned. Basically, it's a cloning process rather than a combining information process. So just as cells follow a life cycle or cell cycle to reproduce, living organisms will reproduce as part of their life cycle. Just like any bacteria, person, whatever, we need to reproduce to keep the species alive. There's two ways to reproduce. One is asexually. This is where you take one organism and it will divide or create an offspring with identical genetic information. These are basically clones. They are cloning themselves. Our cells make this. So if your cells didn't do this, then you would have new cells being made with different genetic information, and it wouldn't be you anymore. So you have to have the same genetic information. So mitosis results in two genetically identical cells. They're basically cloning themselves. So they are all exact copies of the parent. So this happens in all sorts of organisms. The other type of reproduction is sexual, obviously, and this is when genetic information of two cells is combined and makes a new organism. In humans, we have specialized cells that do this, and they're sex cells. We have egg and sperm, and those combine eventually to become a new person. We call that fertilized egg cell a zygote, and we were all zygotes at one point in time. And the offspring is always a blend of the parents. It's not an exact copy. You know, you might look more like one parent than the other, but at the end of the day, you have traits and genetic information from both parents, half from mom, half from dad. So if you look at the image, so asexual reproduction, the offspring is identical to the parent, and in sexual reproduction, the offspring is a mixture of both parents. Some organisms can use both methods of reproduction. Now, what makes bacteria particularly scary is they can clone themselves or combine and change up their DNA. And that's a little bit dangerous, because if you think about bacteria, we use something called antibiotics to kill them. So like penicillin and amoxicillin and these kinds of things. But some bacteria are stronger than others. So this is why doctors will say that you need to always make sure you finish your antibiotics even if you're feeling better, because they want to kill off all the bacteria. The antibiotics will kill off the weakest bacteria first, and the strongest ones will be left. So if you have strong bacteria, like resistant to antibiotics, they can clone themselves. To make more strong bacteria. The other thing, so they can clone themselves, but the other thing they can do is bacteria can mix information and maybe create superbacteria, we'll say. Think of like superbugs. These are bacteria that are extremely antibiotic resistant, so you could have maybe two strong bacteria reproducing sexually, and they combine those traits and make an even stronger bacteria. So this is why doctors have been finding our antibiotics have become less and less effective, because we've been killing bacteria for so long that a lot of the bacteria that remain are just stronger. They're more resistant. It's almost like evolution of bacteria. So it's a mixing of the genetic information. It's a little bit scary. So there are different types of asexual reproduction, and these are the different ways that certain organisms will reproduce asexually. So the first one is called binary fission. It's basically like mitosis. It's where bacteria basically just split into two equal size offspring. This is a really fast, easy way to reproduce, and this is why bacteria can grow so quickly, because they can reproduce this way really, really quickly. It's the same idea as mitosis. The daughter cells are 100% identical to the parent. So you're cloning yourself. Binary fission. Binary meaning two, fission meaning splitting. So splitting into two. Budding. This is my favorite one. Budding is where you're basically growing off a little buddy. So if you have a hydra here, this is an example of an organism called a hydra, and it starts to grow a little baby hydra off its side. So that little baby hydra starts to grow, and it grows into a bigger and bigger and bigger hydra, and eventually once that hydra is big enough to break off and exist on its own, it does so, and you have two hydras that are genetically identical. And this is what it would look like. So this is actually a picture of an actual hydra, and you can see it's got two little buddies growing off its side there, and eventually those little buddies will break off and become their own hydra. Imagine being able to just grow a new you off the side, and then once it becomes mature enough to survive, it just breaks off. It would be genetically identical. Fragmentation. This is actually pretty cool. Now, certain organisms will reproduce this way. Some organisms regenerate, but that's not reproduction. Reproduction is making new organisms. So fragmentation is where you take an organism, and if you cut it or you break it into fragments, each fragment grows a new individual. So a really cool example is flatworms, where they actually you could cut it in a few different ways. So if you cut the flatworm here and here, the midsection, or sorry, here and here, the midsection grows a new, erase what I just did there. Your midsection goes this way and grows a new head and a new tail. This head goes this way and grows a new midsection and tail, and the tail goes this way, it will grow a new midsection and head. So if you cut that flatworm in three different ways, you get, or in three segments, you actually get three new flatworms. And that's what makes this reproduction, because you actually get new individuals. Another way to cut them is you could actually kind of cut them down the midline like so, and you can actually make two-headed hydras, or two-headed flatworms. Kind of a neat idea. Now, lots of organisms will regenerate limbs, but that's not making a new individual. So you would have to cut a piece off or lose a piece of that organism, and the piece and the original organism have to create new organisms for it to be fragmentation. Otherwise, you're just regenerating lost body parts. Spore formation, we see this every summer with dandelions. Those little white things are spores, and those white things, when they land, they basically are like a seed, and they create a new dandelion plant that's genetically identical to the previous one. Molds do this as well. They form spores, it gets in the air, and it will form another colony of mold somewhere else that's genetically identical to the original. Another one is called vegetative reproduction or propagation, where we're actually taking plants, pieces of plants, and planting them, and they'll grow more. So if we're talking about like strawberry bushes will send out a runner, and you can create a new strawberry bush from that. So another one you could do is certain flowers and things. You can take a piece of the flower, bend it down, plant it, or put it underground, and it will actually grow a whole new plant off of that. So it's a clone of the original plant, genetically identical. That's the different types of asexual reproduction.